The Sol system was silent. It was not a peaceful quiet, but the dead air of a tomb, the profound, echoing emptiness that follows a scream you never heard. The Seventh Fleet, humanity's shield and spear, was a ghost. Its remnants, thousands of tons of hyperalloy and human bone, were nothing more than drifting slag reflecting a cold, indifferent sun. What had taken a century to build, what had been the pinnacle of human engineering and martial pride, had been erased from existence in less than 7 minutes. On every open channel, from the encrypted military bands to the civilian emergency frequencies, a single message looped. It was not a broadcast of triumph from a victorious enemy, but something far more terrifying. A simple, declarative statement, a death knell from the void, spoken in a synthesized voice that perfectly mimicked every language it encountered. "We are coming. Make your peace." 8 months, 243 days. That was the deadline humanity was given before the architects of this silence, a race known only as the Devourers, would arrive to finish the job. Earth's final gambit was an act of supreme desperation, a plan forged in the crucible of absolute terror. The mission: convince the 7,442 known sentient species of the Orion Arm, beings of coherent gas, silicon-based apex predators, entities that measured time in glacial epochs, to stand with the insignificant, soft-shelled newcomers who had barely learned to walk between the stars. The pressure was absolute. The hope was infinitesimal. Humanity had to convince a galaxy that had largely ignored it that its death was worth preventing. 72 hours after the Mars Gate was annihilated, shutting off the primary artery of the Sol system, the shattered remnants of EarthGov convened. The meeting was not held in the gleaming towers of Geneva or the historic halls of Washington, but in a hastily repurposed geothermal station a mile beneath the Arctic ice sheet. They stared at a holomap that bled red, a cascade of extinguished systems spreading from the galactic rim. Outposts humanity had spent generations building, from the listening posts at Barnard's Star to the mining colonies in the TRAPPIST system, were winking out of existence. No distress calls, no sensor echoes of battle, no survivors, just the chilling, final silence of erasure. Admiral Kenji Tanaka, his uniform still bearing the scorch marks from his own narrow escape at the Jupiter relay, pointed a trembling hand at the map. "They aren't conquering," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "They are deleting. We have nothing in the arsenal that can slow them down, let alone stop them. The Seventh Fleet was our best. They used tactics we can't even model. 2 options remained on the polished steel table, stark and terrible. The Tanaka Doctrine: commit what was left of their military forces, 3 carrier groups, a handful of system defense fleets, and planetary guard units, to a final, hopeless charge. They would die defying the inevitable, a final broadcast of human defiance hurled into the void before the darkness consumed them. It was a warrior's death, but a pointless one, or the James proposal. Attempt the impossible. Use the 8 months they had been granted to forge an alliance between species who had nothing in common but a shared path to extinction. It was a diplomat's fantasy, a desperate plea to a universe that had never shown much interest in humanity's continued existence. The burden fell to Ambassador Lisa James. It seemed a strange choice. Once a celebrated xenolinguist, her fame came not from negotiating with galactic empires, but from deciphering the complex, melancholic songs of Earth's own humpback whales. She argued that communication wasn't about language, it was about understanding motive, fear, and need. Now she was the designated voice for 8 billion terrified humans. Her only tool was a data drive containing a treaty titled Mutual Extinction Mitigation, a sanitized bureaucratic name for a raw, primal plea: do not let us die alone. They gave us 8 months, Lisa argued, her voice calm amidst the rising panic in the bunker. Why? A predator of this magnitude doesn't need to posture. It's not a threat. It's a timetable. Perhaps it's a test, or perhaps, in their sterile calculus, that is simply how long it takes for their swarm to travel from their last feeding ground to us. Admiral Tanaka scoffed. "You're looking for logic in a hurricane, Ambassador. They are coming to kill us. Our response should be to sharpen our swords, not write petitions. And what happens when your swords shatter, Admiral? Lisa retorted, her gaze unwavering. Your plan guarantees our extinction. Mine offers a flicker of a chance at survival. A flicker is more than we have now. The vote was nearly tied. In the end, desperation, not hope, won the day. Helmet under her arm, a symbol of the alien world she was about to visit, Lisa James boarded the Starglider, a prototype stealth courier, its destination a series of coordinates that were less a flight plan and more a prayer. The first stop, Karanteth, a world-sized crucible of volcanic plains and jagged mountains, governed by the Cathar. They were 8-foot-tall, four-armed warriors, a species that had elevated war to a form of art and saw peace as a symptom of decay. Lisa James was granted an audience in the Great Ossuary, a chamber whose walls were lined with the skulls of worthy adversaries, while the reigning matriarch, Gorsa, polished a massive scythe-like blade that had tasted the blood of 43 separate wars. Lisa presented Earth's grim proposal. She spoke of the Devourers, of the silent systems, and of the shared threat. When she finished, the matriarch's laughter was the sound of grinding stone. You come to us, a species whose bones break if you fall down a flight of stairs, and you ask for our blades? The Devourers sound like a worthy challenge. Why should we tether our glory to your weakness? Your fleet was a brittle shell. We watched the data echoes of its demise. It was pathetic. Lisa James didn't flinch. She slowly reached up and removed her helmet. A fresh, livid purple fracture ran across her scalp, crudely sealed with biofoam, an injury sustained when the Starglider had to make a violent, evasive maneuver to avoid a Cathar patrol. You see weakness? Lee said, her voice steady. I see a species that was struck by a god and is still standing. We are desperate, matriarch. We have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. That makes us dangerous. We are asking for your help not because we are weak, but because we are desperate enough to ask. We are too stubborn to die without trying. Gorsa stopped polishing her blade. She stared at the small, fragile human, at the ugly wound on her head, and saw not weakness, but an echo of her own people's history, a species that refused to break. Insanity, the matriarch growled, a sound that might have been amusement. But it is a bold insanity. The treaty was signed in the blood of a sand hydra. A message spread across the hyperchannels. The humans were either insane or possessed a courage born of utter hopelessness, a species to be watched. Next were the Devourers, a collective consciousness of crystalline entities who perceived 17 dimensions of reality. To them, the physical universe was a crude shadow. They communicated not with words, but by structuring pure mathematical concepts directly into the minds of others. Lee's meeting with them took place in a null-space chamber where physical form was irrelevant. They posed a condition, a single, terrifying equation. If joining the Alliance altered their calculated destiny by more than 0.3%, the resulting paradox would cause their collective existence to unravel. Lee spent a subjective month in a simulated reality with them. Her consciousness stretched across dimensions she couldn't comprehend, wrestling with probability waves and causal looping paradoxes. She was a child learning to count in a room full of master mathematicians. In the end, exhausted and mentally scarred, she found the path, a complex alteration to the treaty's resource-sharing clause that nudged the probability of their survival just inside the acceptable variance. She presented her findings, only to find the Devourers had already calculated every possibility millions of times over. They had known the solution before she even arrived. In 62% of potential futures, refusing the Alliance meant a slow, inevitable death by cosmic apathy as the universe's entropy consumed them. They had made her solve the puzzle simply to see if the human mind was capable of grasping the stakes. They signed, as they communicated to her, for the sheer novelty of a conflict that promised to introduce new, uncalculated variables into the universal equation. Then came the Loxodal, immense, whale-like, aquatic traders who inhabited the methane oceans of a gas giant. Their civilization existed in the crushing depths, and their packs were sealed by consuming an enzyme-laced nutrient broth. To refuse the drink was the gravest of insults. To accept was to be biochemically and spiritually indebted for a loxodal lifetime, roughly 3 human millennia. Lee, encased in a specialized deep-pressure suit, met their grand broker in a cavern of bioluminescent coral. The murky, viscous fluid was presented to her in a ceremonial basin. It smelled of ozone, ammonia, and primal fear. The cost was clear. If they joined, humanity's future would be tied to the Loxotal's commercial interest for generations. Lee looked into the swirling broth, then at the 8 billion lives hanging in the balance. She drank. The taste was indescribable, a jolt to her nervous system that felt like being born and dying at the same time. The Loxodal committed their submersible fleets, leviathans capable of navigating the chaos of deep space as easily as their own oceans, to the cause. Each signature cost Earth something vital. To the Cathar, they gave strategic star systems for training grounds and future spoils. On Phobos, human colonists had to flee their homes when they learned their orbit had become a live fire range. To the Veyari, they handed over every technological patent they had, including the experimental slipspace drive that powered the Starglider. Corporate entities on Earth nearly revolted. For the Loxodal's aid, Earth pledged a percentage of its planetary resources for the next 1,000 years. Every concession bought another weapon, another fleet, another shield aimed at the coming darkness. Lisa James's journey continued to dozens more worlds, each negotiation a new trial, each signature another piece of humanity's soul bartered for one more day. The Alliance fleet finally gathered in the neutral territory of the Ceres asteroid belt, a chaotic, breathtaking amalgam of nearly 8,000 ships from over 200 species who had answered the call. Crystalline Veyari structures that seemed to flicker in and out of phase floated beside massive coral-hulled Loxodal behemoths. Slabs of brutalist Cathar metal bristling with physics-defying armaments dwarfed the sleek, almost delicate designs of smaller, more esoteric races. And at its heart, looking scarred, patched, and crushingly small, floated Earth's carrier, the Endeavor. The first strategic briefing, held on the Endeavor's holodeck to accommodate the myriad lifeforms, descended into acrimony within minutes. The Cathar matriarch Gorza, appearing as a towering hologram, demanded the vanguard, the glorious headlong charge. The Loxodal Grand Broker, his form shimmering in a containment field of his native fluid, insisted on flanking positions where they could bleed the enemy in the cold dark. The Veyari representative, a silent, rotating prism of light, simply projected a timeline where the battle was already won and requested the Alliance follow its predetermined steps, a notion the honor-bound Cathar found deeply insulting. Tensions escalated until the Veyari prism calmly updated the display, showing a 97.8% probability of the Alliance collapsing into infighting before the Devourers even arrived. The arguments raged, a cacophony of languages and threats. It became clear that this alliance was a fiction, a temporary collection of frightened and arrogant powers united only by a common enemy they couldn't agree on how to fight. As Gorza threatened to take her fleet and meet the Devourers alone, Lisa James stepped into the center of the holodeck. Her solution was not born of tactical genius or silver-tongued diplomacy, but of pure desperation. She held up a single scorched hull plate salvaged from a fallen ship of the 7th Fleet. In the weeks leading up to this meeting, she had visited the lead ship of each of the major signatories. She had asked for a token. Now, fused crudely onto the plate, were those tokens. A small, wickedly sharp Cathar ceremonial dagger, a single iridescent Loxodal guidance pearl, and a sliver of a Veyari probability crystal. And in the center, she had placed her own contribution, a simple paper crane, folded by a child in the Arctic bunker before she had left. "This is our alliance," Lisa said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Brutal, beautiful, logical, and fragile. It is ugly. It is clumsy. It makes no sense. But it is all we have." She held it out. "Each of you sees your own strength here. The Cathar see a weapon. The Loxodal see a treasure. The Veyari see a collection of variables. And the humans, we see a prayer. If we fight as individuals, We will die as individuals, and this is all that will be left of any of us. Break this, and you break everything. It was a crude, almost pathetic gesture, an appeal to sentiment in a room full of warriors, mathematicians, and traders. Yet it silenced the chamber. No one wanted to be the one to shatter the fragile, ugly symbol of their last hope. A grudging respect, colder and harder than any friendship, began to form. 8 months and 6 hours after the first warning, the Devourers arrived. They didn't emerge from hyperspace in a clean, orderly fashion. They tore a wound in the fabric of space-time, a festering black rift the size of Venus, just beyond the orbit of Neptune. From this gaping maw poured 12 million bioships, a swarm of chitin and dark energy moving with a singular, predatory hunger. They were a living tide of obsidian blades and pulsating organic engines, utterly silent and perfectly coordinated. The Alliance met them at the Ceres asteroid belt, turning the vast field of rock and ice into a pre-planned kill box. The strategies, once a source of conflict, were now Lisa James's symphony of violence. Human strategy, dispersed formations and missile saturation, fill the void with so much shrapnel and so many warheads that the enemy had to wade through fire. Cathar strategy, a screaming, headlong charge, the glorious, honor-bound anvil. Loxodal strategy, sublight stealth attacks from below the ecliptic plane, bleed the enemy in the cold dark, the flanking hammer. Veillary strategy, secure victory in an adjacent reality, then observe. Or, as Lee had reinterpreted it, strike the enemy where they least expected it, their own future. Lisa, coordinating from the CIC of the Endeavor, fused the four doctrines. The Cathar, in their thousands of brutalist warships, formed the Anvil, a solid wall of fury and firepower that met the Devourer swarm head-on. As the two forces collided, the Loxodal submersible fleets rose from the dark, their energy-leaching torpedoes disabling Devourer ships from their unprotected flanks. Human fighters, small and agile, swarmed like enraged insects, drawing the fire of the larger bioships and guiding missile salvos into exposed weaknesses. And then there were the Veillary. Their torpedoes didn't explode on impact. They struck Devourer vessels and, for a moment, nothing happened. Then a second later, the target ship would vanish, its existence retroactively erased from the timeline by a causality paradox. They were striking Devourer vessels in realities they had yet to occupy, causing them to cease to exist in the present. The battle raged for 14 hours and 17 minutes. It was organized chaos. On the Endeavor's bridge, human engineers jury-rigged their systems, repurposing coffee machine processors to help run Cathar targeting solutions. Loxodal Marines, encased in armored pressure suits, breached the organic hulls of disabled bioships, flooding them with toxic brine from their homeworld. The Veillary prisms, stationed far from the battle, flickered between dimensions, their calculations becoming increasingly erratic as the sheer violence of the conflict warped spacetime. Their final desperate move was to target the wormhole itself. They didn't try to close it. They destabilized its temporal signature. The rift imploded, collapsing in on itself and taking 2.4 million Devourer ships that were still pouring through with it. The Alliance lost 42% of its fleet. The Endeavor was among them. In the final hour of the battle, with its primary systems failing, it drew the fire of 3 Devourer dreadnoughts to protect the Cathar flagship. As the carrier's spine broke and the bridge decompressed, Lee was thrown against a console, her vision fading. The last thing she saw was the massive four-armed form of matriarch Gorsa's personal guard appearing on her bridge via a short-range teleporter. The Cathar warrior grabbed her, threw her bodily into the last functioning escape pod, and slammed the launch button. As the pod shot away from the dying ship, her voice snarled over the comm. "Martyrs make for poor diplomats. Live to forge the next treaty." 6 weeks later, on a neutral moon orbiting the Veillary home system, the treaty was signed again. Its name had been changed. Mutual extinction mitigation was replaced with 2 simple words: the Galactic Compact. There were no arguments over hunting rights or mineral royalties. There were no displays of arrogance. Every representative, from every one of the surviving species of the Alliance, was too weary for conflict. The chamber was silent, filled with the shared memory of loss. Matriarch Gorza, whose fleet had suffered the highest casualties, simply dipped her dagger in ink and signed. The Loxodal Grand Broker touched the document, leaving a phosphorescent binding mark. The Veillary prism inscribed its signature in shimmering light. On Earth, the skies burned for weeks with the constant aurora of debris reentry. Millions of tons of alien metal and biological matter streaked through the atmosphere, a funeral pyre for the fleets that had fought and died in the dark. Children born in that year learned to call the phenomenon the scorch mark, a beautiful, terrible, and permanent scar on the night sky, a reminder of how close they had come to oblivion. Lisa James, her arm in a cast and her face etched with lines that hadn't been there 8 months ago, took the podium at the first official session of the Galactic Compact. She looked as though she were carved from granite in sleepless nights. Her closing statement was simple, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of all she had witnessed. We stand here today in the quiet after the storm. We did not prevail because we were the strongest or the smartest or the most honorable. We did not win by any single measure of strength. We prevailed because, when faced with the absolute end, we were all willing to be the weakest together. We leaned on abilities we did not understand, trusted warriors we did not like, and fought alongside beings we could barely comprehend. We found strength not in our own virtues, but in the virtues of others. The translation was imperfect for some of the assembled species, but the profound silence that followed was universally understood. Humanity's last desperate stand became the galaxy's first uneasy alliance. The Devourers were defeated, but not destroyed. The scar in space-time remains, a wound that may one day reopen. Now a question remains for the new members of this galactic compact. If humanity were to offer one single relic to represent its soul for the next pact, to be placed beside the dagger, the pearl, and the crystal, what would it be? Leave your answer in the comments below. Subscribe for more tales from the Orion Galaxy. Extinction is patient, so are those who stand against it.